Hi, I'm John Townsend, and we've got a lot of great questions today. The main one is on the coin or the bean that goes in a 12th night cake. Thanks for joining us today on Questions and Answers with James Townsend and Son. Here's an interesting question. It's from Leham991, and it's from the Lobscouse video that we did several years back. He says, where on earth do the worms come from? And he's referring to the worms that you find in a ship's biscuit quite often. And even ship's biscuits that I made for the first ship's biscuit video ended up with a worm in it. And it's a really good question. Obviously, the worm didn't come from the flour, because that's been baked so many times. So I'm guessing that these are simple pantry moth worms or something similar to that. But I've never let them hatch out to see exactly what they are. This question is from Justin Killian. It came in on the last question and answer video. He says, I've been looking around and have been wondering just how common buckle shoes really were in the 18th century outside of America, England, and France, more specifically Germany. I'm guessing that he is trying to get at the idea of were buckle shoes common for common people, because I am sure that for middle and upper class people in Germany it was going to be almost exactly the same as France and England and America, that buckle shoes are basically what everybody is wearing. When it comes to lower classes, it can be a much trickier to come up with that information. It's very difficult to come up with that off the top of your head, or even just, scanning through your thoughts, because finding that kind of information is very difficult. Paintings usually are not going to be terribly helpful. Regular people in paintings, you can't always trust what very, very common people were wearing. And it's not something that people tend to write about. And common, very lower or lower class people didn't leave the kind of records that you could easily figure out whether they had buckle shoes, because we don't have their record books of what they spent money on. So it can be a little difficult to answer that question. I'm guessing, though, that in Germany you're going to find a very similar quantity of buckle shoes on people of all the different time ranges. Again, very difficult question to answer precisely without a lot of research. Frank Y. Mortz on the wonderful 12th Night Cake episode says, it would be interesting to see how cheese was produced in a common household back then. Just a thought. Yes, we are interested in doing some cheese episodes in the future, although I kind of wanted to partner with somebody else on this, so it might be a couple of months in the future before we get to cheeses, but make sure to stay tuned. I'm sure that there are going to be some great episodes. The apple fritters episode, Frugal Nanny writes this, just wondering, when did powdered sugar come to our country? How available was it in the 18th century? And what kind of flour did we use in the apple fritters? Well, let's do the flour thing first. Any flour is going to work fine in the apple fritters. The all-purpose flour, like you mentioned, that'll work fine. Powdered sugar is another one of is an interesting question, along with all the sugar questions. Powdered sugar could be easily made in the house, in a household in the 18th century. Mortar and pestles were a very, very common kitchen implement, and you would just take the sugar that you had and crush it up and then sift it to get the powdered type that you wanted. So you could sift it multiple times, and grind it multiple times if you needed very, very fine sugar. It probably was available in larger cities as a product that you could buy all by itself. But again, most people could just make it on their own. Here's a great comment that came up on the Christmas Mince Pie episode. We did that, I think, a whole year ago. It's Wind Chapman, and he says, I made 4 pies using suet that I rendered about 4 years ago, and they all were excellent. And I think that's a very interesting point. Here he's using suet. It's 4 years old, but if it's rendered properly, it's shelf stable and should be good for quite a long time. His pies turned out great. Thanks for sharing. This one's from Dennis M. It says, regarding the candied rinds, how would these have been made during the time period of this cake? Would these have been bought or made at home? Given that they're citrus fruits, I assume that there must have been alternatives for those who could not afford this luxury. Any thoughts as to what they might have substituted? Well, first let's attack that idea of substitutions and the idea of these kinds of candies in this cake in the first place. This was, again, a very, very rich cake, and that didn't just mean rich in taste, but it meant it was a costly cake also. And for the 12th day, it was kind of an important part of that. We have to remember that this might be the only time the entire year they had a cake quite like this. Such an expensive cake. They might have saved up for all year to buy or to have buy the ingredients to make a cake like this. So if they had a 12th night cake at all, it probably had the right stuff in it, as much as they could get and put in it. I don't know what kind of good substitutes there would have been. That's a question for a different time, I guess. They did have recipes for the candied fruits like this all over in the recipe book, so it's a very common thing to find. And apparently in the cities, it's quite likely that you could find that already made too. So it's both. You could make it at home, or you could probably buy it if you were someplace a very large city. So here's Steve Rowe, and he's got a longer comment, but here's the line I want to get. The recipe I have is iced with an elaborate crown on top. The icing on the 12th cake is important. These were very, very fancily iced. And the crown on top is very common, even in the 18th century. You might think that's a 19th century thing or a 20th century thing. No, in the 18th century, they did very fancy decorations on these. Plumes, crowns, little people, ice, little sugar figures. So it's very common. So the cake we made in our episode was very plain because we just did not have the time to go into the icing of a 12th cake, which probably would take a 20-minute episode to make it like it really ought to be. So here we go. Here's the main question. This is Michelle Moore, and she says, what happens with the coin? Does the person who finds it keep it, and was it considered good luck? There's a lot more to this coin or bean than just luck or getting to keep the coin. This 12th night tradition is actually rooted in a much deeper tradition that goes back much farther, an ancient tradition, Romans and probably even earlier. The person who got the coin or the bean was the absolute monarch of the night. They were the king or the queen, sometimes called the bean king. And other people at the party, this 12th night party or festivities, they would be given other roles in the royal court. Now, this would be randomly or possibly other ways that this was distributed. And then they would play this game, having this court all night long. So it's a very, very rich and complex tradition that I certainly don't know much about. I've never encountered this to any great extent. And so it'd be something really interesting to really dig a lot deeper into. I want to wish everyone a happy new year. We have some great, exciting things. We're working on so many things here that it's just painful right now. I want to thank you for all your great comments, your wonderful questions, and I want to thank you for watching. If you're a new viewer and you haven't subscribed, press the subscribe button up here. That'll take you to a spot where you can subscribe. That really is the best way to get notification of all the new videos that are out. I want to thank everyone for watching.